Hello and welcome to the Aziz Corporate Podcast. I'm Khalid Aziz, and today we're exploring a question that sounds almost too simple, but turns out to be anything but. What do we actually mean when we call someone a leader? My guest today is Carola Hieker, who's an executive coach and has spent her career working at the highest levels of organizations, helping senior leaders navigate complexity, build culture, and make better decisions. But today, Carola is not here just as a practitioner, she's also a researcher. And she's just presented the first findings of a study that I think will make a lot of people in leadership and those who follow leaders stop and think. The research was conducted with 28 senior leaders across Europe and multiple sectors, and it uncovers something that Carola calls the leadership blind spot. It's the idea that every word leader carries such a strong positive assumption that it can actually switch off our critical judgment. In a world where high profile ethical failures have become almost routine, that is not a small thing. So we're going to explore what the data shows, what it means for organizations we lead and work in, and what Carola believes needs to change. So I think this is a conversation that probably matters right now. Carola, welcome to the podcast. Let's set the scene first. You've just presented the first findings of this research at a conference. What was the reaction in the room? Did anything surprise you about how people responded to it?
Well, first of all, thank you, Khalid, for having me. And to be very clear to the first question, actually, it was a bit shocking that there were no surprises. Everybody agreed. Everybody said, yeah, when I think of a leader, it's very positive. And then I said, well, so we call it a positive connotation or as a blind spot, but that's dangerous. And everybody said, oops, never thought about this. And we were sitting in the middle of academics, researchers, so who are in all kind of areas. So it is almost an unconscious bias that what we found in the research, but what again was in the room. And it was a bit, oops, this is there. It's in front of our eyes. And we never thought about it. So that was surprisingly not surprising.
Now, you describe something you call the positive connotation problem. So in simple terms, what's the core insight here? Why does that matter beyond academic theory?
A little bit wider, even so being German, I usually come very much to the point. Over the years, whenever I teach leadership, I do it at different universities, at UCL, at Polyme, but also at American University in London and in Rome. And I almost made it their sport to say, okay, give me character traits of a leader. And they're always positive, always. So this is very obviously, this is not research. This is more, everybody was, from charismatic to, warm, emotional intelligence. And these were all students in all different cultures from really India, China. Of course, we are quite cross-dimensional. And also I teach at several universities. I'm guest professor there. And then I asked, so what is a bad leader? And they were like lunatic, influencer. And I said to them, do you know bad leaders? And they said, well, many of the leaders are bad leaders. I was like, there's a consciousness gap in a way. So in a way, implicitly, if somebody has a title leader, we think he is a good man, a good woman. They are a good person in a way. And it's also a person who has the right character traits, and reality looks very, very much different. This is how the research started. I thought, okay, if we almost misled by the terminology leader, and we implicitly also think he has the best for us in an organization, in politics, wherever, for us in mind, this is an unconscious bias. And this is something which needs to be a little bit more researched. And this is how it all started.
But of course, when you talked about leadership to all 28 of your interviewees, every single one across different sectors and countries, they use positive words when asked to describe leadership.
Everybody, but also the students, which are much more, it's a cohort for probably 500 to 1,000 students, which is, unfortunately, I can't put in my research. It was never ever happened that anybody said a negative word. What is a character trait? What comes to your mind with a leader? I tried different questions. So this is almost a fact. I mean, 28 leaders. We have material. We talked to them for an hour and asked other questions, etc. But it seems to be universal. So, and it's a topic which there is a little bit research about it, but it's widely ignored so far.
When people encountered the idea of an unethical leader, though, they seem to, from your research, invent new words: unleader, damaging leader, criminal even, simply saying that's a bad leader wasn't enough. Why do you think people instinctively protect the word leader like you've just described?
They became quite angry. And they also, when they said this, many said, I have this person in mind. And so they had real person in mind who have the title leader and who don't deserve the leader. But as you're right, Khalid, there seems to be an instinct to protect the word leader. And because we almost want the leader to be ethical, correct, to have our best in mind in an organization and politics, to be a good person because a leader is above others. So there seems to be this unconscious wish to protect it. That's a good point. Yes.
But there was one dissenting voice, and I was frankly not surprised to read this, given that I also have some dealings with the academic world. And one of your participants, who was a university vice chancellor, said something very different. Actually said, leadership is a role play. It's not who I am. That really stands out. What do you think that kind of separation actually does, and what does it protect against?
That was an interesting one because everybody else felt very much being the person as a leader, being they felt their personality. They also felt they worked hard for becoming a leader. And their identity, we talk about social identity, their personality was, I'm a leader, this is who I am, and I stand for, and I'm proud of. Well, I guess, especially with this university, and I don't know why you connect, my interpretation was that he sees him first and uttermost as an academic, and that almost the leadership is, and you find this sometimes in academia, that management and leadership is something, it happened to them, but it's not really desirable. So if you have an academic, they probably prefer to be really famous in research and not because they manage a big organization. So it might be a bit different.
Yes, I wonder if it's because of the sort of free thinkingness of the academic world. I mean, they're very much individuals, and they're not very good, never mind leading, they're not very good at following anyone. They are often, one goes into universities and one sees that the various faculties are individual fiefdoms, and they don't bow or kowtow to anyone. They do their own thing. So that may be part of it's a cultural thing, perhaps.
Yeah. And probably he didn't like, and he is very individual, he's very specific. He would love that we talk about him, but probably also felt he doesn't want to be put in a cluster in a category. And so you exactly that it would be, while all the others felt, it is something we need to protect. We are part of a gang, so to say. We have we have an obligation, whatever this is, make things better. And we have to protect it. Exactly. So no, I think you are right with your interpretation that he didn't want to be put into this,
Yeah.
cluster and being just a part of a group in a way.
Yes, and while we're still knocking academics, I should relate the story once when I was on a panel with an industrialist, and we had a senior academician there who was very, very revered in his world. And when I asked him, "What are you doing for helping people to prepare as graduates to get into industry?" he announced that he said, "My job is to save them from industry and make sure they do something far more worthwhile." Which is always pretty critical, I suppose, in the modern industrial and commercial world. Let's move on now to what's happened to unethical leadership in terms of, some would say it's almost become normalized, and we can look across perhaps to America and see that a certain kind of leadership, my way or the highway, knock down, drag them out, I'm really good at everything. Well, you know who we're possibly talking about here, perhaps leads from the top in a way of dealing that many would see as unethical. Do you think things have shifted? I mean, some of your participants described a shift, that behavior that would be career ending 10 years ago is now merely noted. Oh my goodness, what is he like?
Absolutely.
An executive coach often sees these things. Is that your own practice? And do you think the bar is genuinely moving? And will it move back or continue to move away from what used to be the norm 10, 15 years ago?
Well, let's start with your last. I'm an optimist. I think it's always a little bit, swinging. And I personally think it will move back. However, one participant said there was this quote, which I love. You get the behavior you tolerate. And what he claimed was Kurt Lewin. I later searched, obviously, I'm an academic. One, I don't know if Kurt Lewin ever said this. However, there's some truth. If it's accepted, especially at the top, below in an organization, people don't seem to see the point why they should still behave ethically. So there was in several interviews, it was said that it was a bit contagious, and maybe especially in organization one, we haven't explored this, but we want to explore it further. There was several statements because we had a couple of family owned institute or big pharmacies and or automotive. And we had also people who have worked in family and in private business and family business. And that was very clear that they felt in family business, sustainability and ethical behavior is much more important than probably an organization where you are in the board or in the executive teams for 2-3 years and then you get fired, and that in a way whatever happens after me, it will be fine, and I just need to make sure that the numbers are okay, I look good, what happens after me, I don't know. So that was a very, very interesting reflection. But the key was, if we normalize or some behavior, if it doesn't get caught early and it doesn't get, we can't do this, then it becomes normality in an organization. And I can see this. At the same time, everybody said, and this is a bit of a paradox, that the rules of compliance get harder and harder and harder. But then there was also one who said, and I found this, well, as a researcher, I don't comment, was, well, ethics is to be aligned with compliance, and which I thought was interesting in his understanding of I'm a leader, but in a way I just need to follow what compliance tell me. So it's quite complex issues, but all of them were very emotional about it. And we on purpose just talked to European leader because we thought there's also, and we can't find it. And again, we need to look at the data. There is a little bit of, while we are still upholding some ethical laws and a regime, which you can't see in the US, or we can see in the US degrading quite fast. So there was a bit Europe against the US. So we didn't take anybody from the US and focus really on boards and senior levels in Europe.
Yes, I mean, one can think of a number of trite sayings around this issue, like the ends justify the means, and also a situation that if it's not against the rules, then it must be ethical, which isn't always the case, of course, because this is the big debate between principles-based governance and rules-based governance. The rule can always be got round, whereas principles are often trickier to do that. And one can think of, for example, the famous case of the Sackler pharmaceutical business, where, all that needed to happen was that the rest of the execs stood around as possibly good men doing nothing to allow evil to happen. And it genuinely was evil in those cases, and it was certainly unethical. So pretty tricky stuff for those confronting the whole question of what is ethical. And I suppose also in financial services, since the crash in 2008, they have been so hidebound by, they would say, all the regulation that has come in, that they see compliance as the only thing they have to demonstrate rather than rely on any sense of personal ethics. Well, it's an interesting one. Let's talk about the human costs now, Carola. If the threshold for what counts as acceptable leadership conduct is drifting, what does that mean for the people working under those leaders, the ones who relied on the label to tell them that they were in safe hands? They were in the hands of a good leader.
So obviously there were people also who were the second line, they were not always there were quite a lot of interviewees in the supervisory board and in the executive team, but then we also, and there were different reaction, but actually most, it was being angry if something was accepted above and their seniors got away with it. And the reaction, especially for instance in military, and there were a couple of scandals which people loved to tell us the scandals, and we were quite busy anonymizing everything, of course. And then there was this, I'm different. So it is, so on the one hand, you find I'm different, and they felt, I really make an effort to reflect, to be ethical, to behave in the right way. These people were also at the same time kind of shouted out the danger of that some behavior gets normalized. And I think you find both. So we just talked to seniors, very senior people. So on a very, very low, on the follower level, it would be an interesting research to say, what does it really mean for you as a follower, even if you have just a small team? Because everybody still had a very senior team and they were like, I keep the moral up and I'm not doing it.
Let's talk now about some of the practical implications, because, of course, you argue that there's almost a kind of, in the shadow of the leader, the word leader itself has become what you call a cognitive shortcut that actually suppresses people's own intrinsic ethical judgments.
Yes.
So how do you as a coach work with that dynamic, especially when someone is clearly in the shadow of a powerful, positively labeled leader who may not actually deserve that trust?
Funny enough, with the people, the senior leaders I work, most of them are struggling in terms of, they have their internal ethical struggle, which I really value in terms of what is the right thing. There's obviously, again, lots of literature, the end in between. You need to make money, but you need to act accordingly to the lines, but also ethically and what is good for the people, etc. And sometimes in investment banking, so I worked a lot with investment banking, it was that there was clearly some not so ethical behavior. And then they got almost as a punishment coaching. And I felt sometimes, or feel sometimes as a super nanny, because it felt like when there was some punishment necessary, was a good person, probably because I'm German, because I have all these professor titles, etc., because I'm also fairly direct. And in these situations, what I really noticed is people find it really hard. What is the right behavior, senior leaders? And when you have them to say, whatever don't care what's your ethical decision. Just, listen, do this, involve the people, work on the team, don't be competitive in your team, etc. And they behave like this. It's almost, we call it the cognitive dissonance theory. They start behaving in an ethical way, first to please the coach and HR, and because they know they are a bit on the shit list. And then they suddenly think, maybe I am a good person. And they almost become the other way around. The behavior changes first, and then the ethical considerations change. And I find this very powerful. When I started coaching, I was always like, you need, your beliefs need to be the right ones. And then, now I'm much more, if the person behaves rightly, it will be okay. And in the long run, it will be also the beliefs will change. And I find this very, very powerful. And there's a lot of, especially when top senior leaders, whatever, the supervisor get asked from the supervisory board, that the CEO needs a bit of, and then there's a conflict. And then they ask you, but do they really believe in what they are doing? And I'm like, who cares? If they do the right thing, which is right for the company, right for the society, and right for the team and the environment, etc., it will come. And that's something I really learned in the coaching. And So what is right is the next question. And I often like these, we wrote a book about leadership development, and we use often an onion. So leading yourself, leading your team, leading your department, leading your institution, but also leading in the up to VUCA world. And in a way, what is right? It's almost going through all layers and saying, is this still okay? Is this on all layers? Can I tick a box that it's sustainable and it's the best in this moment of time, because it's complex. We don't know sometimes what is right or wrong, but we know with all the information we have, this is the best decision at this moment in time.
Now, Carola, you're on record as calling for a terminological and conceptual reset when it comes to leadership. It's the idea that effective leadership, ethical leadership, and simply being in charge need to be treated as separate things. So what would that actually look like in practice inside an organization?
Yeah, let's step one back, because many decades ago, you know, Kotta came up and said, we have managers and we have leaders. And this stage, it was accepted to have, I mean, obviously there's huge overlap, but it was almost accepted that there something which was same thing beforehand and was a big overlap became a little bit, when you do a manager is much more operative, and while the leader is more inspirational, etc. And almost I wished we would develop a terminology for a bad leader, because it seems like a good leader is a leader, so we can't do anything about this. But that people would easily say like this, oh, this is not a leader, it's a manager. They would say, this is not a leader, he's an influencer. Unfortunately, the influencer terminology is gone already, which makes it, honestly, I think 30 years ago would have been easier. Lots of terminologies are gone. But you could argue an influencer has leadership qualities, leads, has followers, but not necessarily has good connotation. So that would be if I could have a wish, I would like that everybody thinks you differentiate in terms of, yeah, sure, he leads, but he's more of an influencer than a real leader. And that, unfortunately, doesn't exist yet in our language, but it needs to be observed. And yeah.
If there was one thing about how organizations hire, promote, or evaluate leaders based on your research, what would it be?
I just did a recruitment interview for 3 hours, and it's really about going through the layers, having a high self-reflection and being able to see strengths and obviously overuse strengths or development needs. And then going through the layers in terms of what does it mean when I lead a team? What does it mean when I lead a bigger department, an institution, when I'm representing my institution and society? And what does it mean so to go through the layers? And often organizations focus on one thing in the department or in the team. It doesn't really work well. Or in the organization, it doesn't work so well. Instead of going through all layers, even when I'm on a C-level. So they would say on the organization, it doesn't work so well. They still have to look, what does it mean for society, but also what does it mean for him, her, they, as a human being? So it goes through all the layers.
Okay,
The
good.
onions on the onion layers.
Well, it's very intense research, and you've spent your career coaching senior leaders. And like all of us who coach senior leaders, you probably clung to the beliefs that you have experienced from doing the work you do. But you've researched this now. So how has this research changed how you see leadership and how you approach your own work? Has it informed something that will be a major change, or is it an evolution?
It's an evolution, but I also think, I do this, I'm now a senior executive coach since 29 years. I have more than 15,000 coaching hours. But in addition to the research, I'm probably a little bit more challenging, provocative. So on the one hand, I'm still an optimist, but I would probably be clearer in my feedback in terms of still questions, but what are the consequences for you? What is the consequence here? I wouldn't let the leader get away with really unethical decisions. I wouldn't do this, which is probably, and I would question and I would make so they should feel the conflict of interest and find the best solution in this moment of time and not bullshit themselves to say, it's okay and you couldn't act differently. And probably I would have closed an eye or being a bit more softer or diplomatic or a bit more, it's okay, it's a difficult situation. So I'm more demanding these days.
Now, Carola, I hope I've asked you some deep and penetrating questions, but is there a question that you wish someone would ask you about this research that nobody has asked you yet?
I don't know if I wish somebody to ask me. It's a little bit in research in general, because it's this, what about, so what? And I don't really want to be asked this, because I ask myself, but I do this when you do research or when I do research. And when you move in an academic environment, you need to keep motivating yourself, because sometimes it's a bit, okay, I can wish for that a terminology would be leader versus influencer. I can wish so, I can do the research, but so what? So not a question I want to be asked, but it's probably a question which is very open.
The so what question is very important. Carola, thank you. It's been a thought-provoking conversation. The leadership blind spot isn't just an academic finding. It's a mirror held up to us all who either follow or point or aspire to lead. The label we give someone shapes what we are allowing ourselves to see. And for our listeners, here's a challenge to take away. The next time you grant someone your trust because they carry the title of leader, pause. Ask yourself, am I seeing this person clearly, or am I seeing just the label? Ethical leadership isn't a given, it's a standard we have to hold, and we have to hold to and hold everyone else to. Well, that's it for this podcast. Subscribe to the Aziz Corporate Podcast to catch our next episode. And don't forget to visit our website at www.azizcorp.com for more insights from the Aziz Corporate Coaching community. For the moment, though, goodbye.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.